Muy buenas tardes. Damos un minutico para que los asistentes pues terminen de ingresar y iniciamos enseguida. Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Un muy caluroso saludo a nuestra audiencia en general, a nuestros estudiantes, profesores y exalumnos, comunidad externa. Mi nombre es Erika Ferrer, soy la coordinadora de la maestría en la enseñanza del inglés de la Universidad del Norte. Agradecemos su presencia en esta conferencia, Peacebuilding in the Language Classroom, The Role of Discourse, a cargo de la doctora Luz Karime Calle Díaz, en el marco del simposio de investigación de la maestría en la enseñanza del inglés. En estos momentos quiero cederle la palabra a la ingeniera Pía Osorio, nuestra decana, quien les va a dirigir un saludo.
Hola, buenas tardes. Para mí es un gusto y un privilegio estar rodeado de ustedes, profesores, investigadores, compañeros de trabajo. Es un placer verlos en este evento anual de nuestra maestría, organizado por la profesora Erika, que muy rigurosamente hace su trabajo. En este año, pues lastimosamente lo desarrollamos virtualmente. Esperemos que pronto vuelva a ser presencial, con parte virtual también. Este simposio, como ustedes saben, tiene por objeto formalizar y dar a conocer en nuestra comunidad académica las investigaciones que se desarrollan por los estudiantes del programa por la guía de sus fabulosos tutores. Nos ofrece también la oportunidad de participar en un espacio de intercambio académico con exalumnos y con la comunidad externa. En esta oportunidad les traemos a ustedes a nuestra querida profesora Luz Karime Calle, una chica genio, quien estuvo vinculada al Instituto de Idiomas hace algún tiempo como profesora de tiempo completo, y nos pareció que era una profesora maravillosa, y bueno, y ella siguió sus instintos investigadores y se convirtió en la doctora que ustedes conocen ahora. Luz Karime ha concentrado su investigación entre la enseñanza del inglés y la construcción de paz. Sea este el momento para invitarlos a que sigan cercanos a nuestros proyectos, a que sean muy cercanos a la universidad y a todas estas iniciativas investigativas. Y bueno, los dejo con Erika nuevamente y muchas gracias por acompañarnos y un feliz fin de semana después de esto.
Muchas gracias.
Por favor.
Muchas gracias, Pia. Well, now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Luz Karime, our Luz Karime. She holds a PhD in education from Universidad del Norte. Luz Karime has worked in an EFL teacher in different educational levels, teacher educator, and research advisor. She coordinated the design of the National Suggested English Curriculum for Transition and Primary, and has taken part in different projects related to bilingualism with the British Council and the Ministry of Education. Her current research interests revolve around the role of language and discourse in the building of a more peaceful Colombian society. So, teacher also in our master's program. Welcome, Luzca, una vez más.
Thank you.
You can go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Pia and Erika, for this warm welcome. Thank you, everyone who's here to listen to me. Thank you very much for your presence. So today, for this talk, what I would like to do is kind of simulate what the students in the masters are going to be later. They are going to be presenting their dissertations, and so I wanted to kind of organize my talk around the same idea of presenting my doctoral dissertation, and giving you also some ideas around peace building in the language classroom and the pivotal role of discourse. So let's begin. First of all, I want to mention that my study is a critical microethnography on the potential of classroom discourse for peace building in a 5th and 6th grade classroom of a public school on the north coast of Colombia. By focusing on a series of episodes of Classroom Live, I draw attention to the relationships between the grammar of interactions and the social structures that are invoked through discourse choices. I started this study with the hope that it will provide theoretical as well as practical inspiration for reconstructing interactions that more solidly contribute to peace building and social justice. You will see that along my presentation, hope is at the basis of everything that I will be talking about. Considering the research problem that I wanted to focus on, which was and continues to be the high levels of symbolic and structural violence in Colombian classrooms as a reflection, of course, of Colombian society, as well as the understanding of discourse as probably the most tangible evidence of this violence. This study asked two main questions. First, in what way do school discourse practices at a public school on the north coast of Colombia contribute to or detract from peace building and social justice? And second, how are discourses characterized at the micro, meso, and macro discursive levels in relation to peace building and social justice? And I will talk a little bit about these three levels in a moment. Next, please. In order to act as a reference and theoretical support for answering those questions, I have put together a theoretical framework which lies on the social perspective on language, which you see here at the bottom of the graph. This is based mostly on Michael Halliday's perspective on language. That means that language is a social realization and the main lens through which data is regarded in this study. Then you can see four theoretical perspectives that complement each other and act as the link between language, which is at the bottom of the graph, and peace education, which is on the top. These four perspectives are the relation between discourse, education, and social structure, the role of dialogue in social interaction, the theory of positioning and its importance for social encounters, and citizenship education that you know has been the basis for peace education in Colombia for many years now. The top part of the diagram then shows peace and social justice education because that is the ultimate aim of this research. However, there are three main theoretical tenets that you see on the slide, which are central to this project. Critical discourse analysis, which focuses on how texts serve as tools of oppression. It looks into the role of language in shaping relationships of power and privilege in different types of interactions. As Dr. Rogers and colleagues have written, some of the aims of critical discourse analysis are to disrupt discourses, challenge restrictive pedagogies, challenge passive acceptance of the status quo, and reveal how texts operate in the construction of social practices. On the other hand, there is a more recent branch of discourse studies that have been called positive discourse analysis. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. This emphasizes on discourses of emancipation rather than oppression, discourses that aim at resisting hegemony and struggling for equality and social justice in order to make the world a better place. In this study, and of course, thinking about this idea of hope, I have tried to maintain a positive stance when approaching the data. That means that I have not only looked for discourses that hinder peace building, but also for those discourse practices that provide potential opportunities for social transformation from a positive point of view. Finally, I have incorporated the notion of peace linguistics to my theoretical framework. This was mainly developed by Brazilian professor Francisco Gomes de Matos. and has been considered an emerging yet crucial branch of linguistics in general. Next, please. So as I was saying, Professor Francisco Gomes de Matos is the main theorist for applied peace linguistics. And what he does is giving us a series of principles on how we as language teachers need to think about language and peace in our everyday practice. So he considered these principles as the main or the most important ones. First, language should have a deeply humanizing function. Languages should be taught, learned, and used for humanizing purposes on the basis of such values as human rights and justice and peace. Language users and learners should learn how to interact and to be interacted with within human, dignifying, peace-promoting ways. Teachers of English should be educated not only to be able to communicate about peace, but to know how to communicate in peaceful ways, with a focus on communicative peace as a deeper dimension of communicative competence, which we all know about. And finally, he considers that TESOL education programs should include a methodological component centered on how to prepare teachers to teach English for communicative peace. Gomes de Matos also proposes some questions that we need to ask ourselves when teaching English for peace. Erica, you can go to the next slide. And I'm not going to read each of the questions. I'm just going to leave them there for you to see. But basically, he considers that we, as language teachers, and if, as me, you want to become what he has called peace linguistic applier, we need to ask ourselves, how can we, or how can my English language students, for example, express their communicative dignity in speaking, writing, singing, or how they can improve mutual understanding bilingually or multilingually? How can they use languages to improve intra and intergroup communicative harmony? And he continues with more questions. In the next slide, we find, for example, those questions that have to do with one of the aspects of peace linguistics, which is action, taking action towards peace. So we can ask, how can our learners help peace initiatives or movements or projects of a local, national, regional, or international scope? How can they encourage peaceful uses of languages through artistic productions, for example? How can they contribute to strengthening uses of languages on the internet for international cooperation and solidarity? And here, different ideas come to mind in terms of critical media literacy, the use of social media with thinking of communicative peace. Next. In 2018, Andy Curtis wrote a paper called The Resurrection of Peace Linguistics, because Francisco Gomes de Matos had talked about this in the 1990s and in the 2000s. But in reality, this is a branch that has not been explored in depth. So he wrote a definition for peace linguistics, which I quote here. Peace linguistics is an area of applied linguistics based on systematic analysis of the ways in which language is used to communicate or create conflict and to communicate or create peace. Peace linguistics is interdisciplinary, drawing on fields such as peace studies, peace education, and conflict resolution and transformation, bringing those together with fields such as social linguistics and critical discourse analysis, including text and genre analysis. So my study in my doctoral dissertation aimed at kind of bridging that gap and providing more research to the field of peace linguistics. I'm going to move now to the methodology section of my dissertation. And you are going to see in this slide a framework that I put together as part of the methodological structure of the study. So I stand from a critical paradigm. You know that the critical paradigm looks for transformation, social transformation. And within that paradigm, I chose two methods, ethnography and discourse analysis. And within those two methods, I considered different traditions. In ethnography, for example, I considered educational ethnography, critical ethnography, and in discourse analysis, positive discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, and multimodal discourse analysis. And with these traditions in mind, I built a framework that I called a critical microethnography of school discourse, which allowed me to analyze my data, collect and analyze my data. On the next slide, you will see the data collection and the data analysis procedure. I used a variety of data sources, for example, observation, field notes, audio and video recordings, informal interviews and conversations, all of these as part of the ethnographic side of my dissertation, some artifacts like pictures and ethnographic data, and then document analysis. All of this became my corpus. So when I had this corpus, which was very large, I had to find a way to select the data that I was going to analyze. So in order to do that, I decided to use what Fairclough calls cruises or moments of crisis. So when I was looking into my data, I found episodes in which things were not going right, or where there were peace building was at risk. So I found moments in which the discourse was not working very well, but also and this has to do with the positive stance that I wanted to keep when looking at the data. I looked for episodes that were evidence of peace building in play or at play, so that I could see both sides, like how can discourse hinder peace building, but also how can discourse promote peace building. So after selecting the episodes, what I did was using a framework for analysis. And this framework was an extension from a framework proposed by Chuliaraki and Fairclough in 1999. They proposed 3 levels. The first level, which is called the micro level, looks at text. And here I used the theory of systemic functional linguistics to look at the ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions of discourse. On the second level, which is called the meso level, this allowed me to see the interplay of discourse and larger social activity, social relations, and mental phenomena. In other words, how this discourse was an instantiation of beliefs or values or other social processes. Finally, the macro level looked for conjunctures of social practices, that is, meaningful links between what I was seeing in the school episodes and extended social practices and structures. So here what you see is like the connection between that discourse and those examples of classroom discourse and larger social structures. Next, I wanted to mention also the participants and the context. I briefly mentioned them earlier. They were a group of 22 students in 5th and 6th grade, the same group of students that was transitioning from elementary to secondary school at a public school on the north coast of Colombia. This school serves families from low and very low socioeconomic strata, some of which come from very difficult household environments, sometimes including domestic violence, addiction, and crime. So I was in this setting for 2 years when they were in 5th and then in 6th grade. I will move now to the results of the study. And here, I want to say that in order to present the results, I follow that same idea of episodes or vignettes. So my dissertation has 4 chapters, 4 results chapter, and each of them analyzes a different episode from my data. So the first results chapter is called The Discourse of Labels and Nicknames. This one talks a little bit about a problematic situation that was very common in this classroom, that was using nicknames to make fun of each other. And I'm sure we all teachers, we're all familiar with that. The results here reveal the need to allow teachers and students transformation of discourse practices as a way to see how peace building can unfold across interactions and be accumulated into habits of mind and body. The next chapter was called, or is called, Students' Voices for Peace Building, the case of religious diversity. This one presents the analysis of the interaction between a teacher and a female student, who I called Camila, who resists to accept the religious beliefs imposed by the majority of the class. Here, I concluded that providing meaningful classroom debates where different political and religious beliefs or views can be safely put forward and discussed may help to give students the necessary tools to understand and respect other worldviews. The next chapter is called the Students' Representation on the Value of Respect, a Multimodal Discourse Analysis. Here, I present the analysis of students' illustrations about what they understand by respect. By means of multimodal discourse analysis, I could conclude that respect is usually understood from a very superficial level, and it is generally connected to courtesy or good manners. Respect is also understood as the opposite of direct or symbolic violence. And I'm going to comment a little bit about this in a moment. And finally, my last result chapter is called El Manicomio, Figured Worlds of a Sixth Grade Class. And this chapter revolves around discourse as a tool for oppression and stigmatization. The analysis of these figured worlds reflected in discourse helped to determine that aiming for peace is an endeavor that involves justice and social equity. These two aspects in schools are determined in part by the assurance that all students have the same responsibilities, the same opportunities, or the same rights. So in order to discuss these findings, we're going to move to the next slide. I could determine at least four aspects in discourse that can contribute to or detract from peace building and social justice. First of all, there needs to be coherence between pedagogy and discourse. Sometimes discursive practices contradict peace-building pedagogies, of course, diminishing their positive impact. And this was the case in some of the data that I analyzed. Secondly, opening discursive spaces in the classroom to embrace others' beliefs and values offers a window of possibility for peace building. This involves looking at how authority is exercised, for example, and reinforced through discourse, and how different voices are allowed in the classroom. Third, it is common to see peace-building pedagogies focus on the teaching of values, like what was the case in this third episode around the value of respect. This, I concluded, needs to be complemented with discursive moves that not only talk about values, but talk in the language that those values represent. Discursive features such as more relativization in speech or hedging, conciliation devices, respecting other people's turn to speak, agreeing to disagree, avoiding interruptions, avoiding yelling and shouting might only be a starting point. Finally, avoiding stigmatization through discourse is another way of contributing to peace building and peacemaking in the classroom. Other important insights, which you see around here on the slide, could be concluded about the role of the institutional context for embracing peace building. It's very difficult to work for peace without an institutional environment that allows you to do that, as well as notions such as dialogicity and positioning and citizenship education, and the relation, again, between discourse, education, and social structure, and the connection of all these aspects to peace building and social justice. So after the discussion, I could draw some conclusions from my study, which I present next. I have summarized here like the main ones. Number one, schools are microcosms that replicate social structures. This is something that Giroux said back in 1999, and it's absolutely true today. So what we see in schools is a reflection of what happens in society. Education is influenced by a pedagogic discourse that often perpetuates the status quo and reproduces ideas of class and gender, race, as well as patterns of interaction and discourse practices that may foster inequalities and disempowerment. So we as teachers need to bear in mind that pedagogic discourse that we use in our classrooms. Classroom discourse analysis can inform subsequent actions towards teachers' development or also institutional efforts towards the centrality of discourse in a classroom setting. Also, some more conclusions on the next slide. Language permeates every aspect of our lives. We do everything we do it through language. It is therefore a fundamental pillar for peace building and social justice. Relationships with others are construed through language, and values and beliefs are transmitted through language. And we as teachers standing in front of a classroom and using our language every day, we are also transmitting values and beliefs. Unveiling violent patterns in discourse is a starting point for pedagogical and social transformation. As I said at the beginning, discourse is the most tangible evidence of our beliefs and our, and it's actually action. Like using language is not only using language, it's also acting upon those who listen to our language. Peace building, finally, is a process that can extend across lexical and grammatical choices, discourse processes, and institutional structures. So now I'm going to move on and talk about the contributions of my study. And I could find different contributions, but I wanted to point out here the main four, in my opinion. Number one, it says critical and positive discourse analysis within a microethnographic framework. It is a research design that is not very common in literature, so this study aims at contributing to strengthen this aspect, as well as present a design with some concrete procedures on how to develop that critical and positive discourse analysis using microethnography. Number two, I could study peace building from a qualitative perspective. And I found in my lead review that this is something that is not common, at least in Colombia and Latin America. Peace building is usually regarded from a very quantitative point of view. Number three, this study fills a very important gap in the field of peace linguistics, as I mentioned before. It is a field of study that starts to develop in literature, and it's of course underdeveloped. So this study is giving clear tools on how to do peace linguistics in the school context. And finally, I want to call attention to what I have called transformative discourse analysis. And I think this is probably the main theoretical contribution of my study. This, it's an original contribution to the field of discourse studies in general, and it presents an alternative to recognize the transformative power of discourse in social dynamics that are around us. Here, in my study, specifically in one of the episodes, I could develop an example of transformative discourse analysis. So after I selected the episode, I did the analysis of the 3 levels. Then I sat down with the participating teacher and we took a look at the audio that I had analyzed, and using this idea of transformative discourse analysis, the teacher could draw conclusions on how her discourse was not coherent to her pedagogy. So this was a very interesting episode that I could do for my study, and I think more of this needs to be done. Next, some of the limitations of the study had to do with the limited data collection during the second year because the students' schedule changed. So I didn't have as much availability as I did in the first year. Again, I could only conduct transformative discourse analysis with one of the episodes, and I wanted to do it with the 4 episodes. That was another limitation. And some teachers did not participate during the second year because during the first year, students were in 5th grade, so they mainly had one teacher. But when they moved to 6th grade, they had different teachers for the different subjects, so only a few of them wanted to participate. So I could only analyze the data that in which those teachers were participating. Finally, so I would like to mention some further lines of research, and this is probably the most important part of my talk today, because I would really like more people to join me in this idea of looking at language and discourse and peace building. And these lines of research mostly have to do with transforming these findings that I got into concrete and visible action in the classroom. So I have pointed out a few here. The first one, participatory action research projects involving groups of teachers and students who can, for example, collect data in their own school and community context in order to analyze it collaboratively with the aim of creating school environments that are conducive to peace building and peacemaking discourse patterns. Also, conducting more positive discourse analysis. I think there is a pressing need to keep on discovering discourses that are doing well in public schools, because what we see normally is what is wrong. And it would be great if we can find these discourses and analyze them and replicate them in different scenarios. On the other hand, this study could only present one exemplification on how transformative discourse analysis can be used, as I said before. And this is, I think, one line of future research that can be expanded after this study, whose aim could be to expand the affordances and scope of discourse analysis and to contribute to generate more literature in this emerging branch of peace social linguistics. Also, teacher education. I think microethnographic classroom research can turn into a possibility for in situ, in-service teachers' professional development. One way to do this is by creating collectives of teachers who can work together as live learning communities where discourse can be put at the center of their interests. Another future research line that this study can illuminate is the process of subject areas as well as institutional curriculum development to incorporate the centrality of language in citizenship competence development across the curriculum. One of the things or one of the issues that schools have to face is deciding how they are going to put into practice those policies which are usually top-down about citizenship competences and peace building and Cátedra de la Paz. So I think looking at language and the centrality of discourse can also be an alternative for these schools to work on peace building across the curriculum. Also, there is very little evidence of Latin American scholars working on the intersection of discourse analysis and peace building. You already saw that there is support, theoretical support on why TESOL and EFL teachers need to focus on peace building. So a key future research possibility is to grow this scholarship by emulating studies that connect discourse patterns with the realization of peace in other Colombian and Latin American contexts. Finally, a central line of future research needs to be focused on the design and implementation of classroom pedagogies that, making discourse a central element, can foster peace building and social justice. These can be inspired, for instance, by restorative practices or pedagogies that involve collaboration or reconciliation and conflict management. And I would like to finish today's talk and give some space for questions and comments with this quote from Freire, again around the notion of hope. And it's basically that idea that we as teachers in Colombia, or at least that's how I feel, sometimes it's very difficult to have hope and to think that we can actually do something to contribute to peace building in our context. And so I found this quote from Freire that basically says that it is our job to continue hoping for the best, but this hope has to be linked to action. So he talks about a hope that is permeated by rage and love. So, and he says that hope needs to be connected to action. So my invitation would be to continue hoping and believing that we can make a change, and that we as language teachers have a great responsibility in transforming our students' contexts and environment, and we can be key in the development of peace in our country. Thank you very much, and I think it's a great time for questions and comments.
Thank you, Karime, for such illuminating, groundbreaking work that you've done. It's really admirable, and you have synthesized it quite beautifully, I think, and clearly. There are some questions from the audience, and we have around 17 minutes for questions. So I'm gonna try to read some of the questions here. Hold on a second. Okay. So first question that we got here from Jorge Vega is, what is multimodal discourse about? Is something that you mentioned, I think that called his attention. So if you could briefly.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Jorge. Multimodal discourse is discourse that is created through different modes. So you can have pictures, sound, oral language, or gestures, or body language. So when you, for example, analyze the cover of a magazine, you are analyzing a discourse multimodally. Or if you take a picture of your classroom and you analyze the way your students are sitting, that is also multimodal discourse. So it's an analysis that you conduct to discourses in different modes.
Okay, thank you. The next question is by Jorge Linero. He asks, why did you decide to call the last chapter El Manicomio?
Thank you, Jorge. It was because when I arrived in the school the second year, my group of students were receiving this nickname, or this label. So the class was being called El Manicomio by certain teachers and certain people. So I found that really interesting, and that's why it revolves around the notion of stigmatization and labeling in discourse. So I started asking questions and interviewing teachers and coordinators, and then I talked to the students about why they were being called this way and how they felt, and what they said was really, really interesting to analyze, because it not only, like, it went deeper than just the name of El Manicomio. There were a lot of interesting ideas on justice and equality and discrimination around that figured world that had been created around them. So that's why it's called El Manicomio.
There is two questions here that revolve around the same topic, by two of our professors, Rosado and Rey. And they are about teacher education. So how could teacher education programs infuse these perspectives into their curriculum? Or is this only possible when teachers are in service? So it's like, how do you envision this? It's basically the question.
There are many, many possibilities. What I think the first idea that came to my mind when drawing conclusions about this was the possibilities of creating collectives of teachers that work together in a school setting to analyze their own discourses, to record their own lessons, and to work towards this idea of transformative discourse analysis. But I guess in teacher education programs, this is also something that has to be infused, because at least from my own experience, I don't think we pay enough attention to discourse and how discourse is the realization of its action in place. So I think more ideas on discourse analysis, procedures for discourse analysis can be also included in these programs. The idea of the different branches of discourse analysis, like multimodality, and this criticality, which is key in discourse analysis, understanding literacy, critical literacy, media critical literacy are other options to work from teacher education programs.
Okay, thank you. There is another question by María Cristina Valderrama. She says, muy interesante e inspirador. Luz Cari, me hablas de incluir el discurso de Peacebuilding en el desarrollo de currículo como futuras investigaciones. Y pregunta, ¿han avanzado en estos procesos en Uninorte? No sé si allí de pronto tú quieres responder o yo pueda agregar algo a tu respuesta.
Creo que tú puedes agregar más. Desde mi experiencia, sí se ha hecho. De hecho, algunas de los estudiantes de la maestría hoy presentan aproximaciones a esa inclusión de la construcción de paz a través de la literacidad crítica. Hemos tenido también tesis en el pasado como con esa idea de lenguaje y construcción de paz, pero en términos curriculares creo que tú nos puedes dar más información.
En términos de investigación, como bien lo dices, Karime, pues se ha incorporado y de hecho ya tenemos varias tesis aprobadas y publicadas en el repositorio de la universidad, de la biblioteca. Y curricularmente, en cuarto semestre, los estudiantes tienen un eje muy fuerte en educación, lenguaje y democracia, que trabaja todos estos temas de vivir en equidad y de cómo la educación puede ser una estrategia para llegar a tal fin. Y también tenemos un módulo en seminarios coyunturales que precisamente se llama Peace Education. Entonces es una corriente como que va tomando más fuerza porque ya pues curricularmente tiene un componente, además de los intereses de los investigadores, profesores de la maestría.
Y creo que también, Erika, dentro de ese esfuerzo del Instituto de Idiomas, también la carrera de lenguas y cultura tiene un énfasis muy fuerte en cultura y su conexión con construcción de paz. Entonces, eso también.
Absolutamente valioso. Sí, a nivel de pregrado, pues ya viene un elemento, un componente bastante fuerte subiendo en los estudiantes que hasta ahora tenemos en el programa. Entonces, es un área en progreso que ya tiene presencia tanto en el pregrado como en el posgrado, pero ya se está trabajando en ello. Yasmín Bolívar pregunta, how did you manage the students' level to develop their macro, meso, and micro language level? So, in terms of language level, ¿cómo fue tu experiencia con los estudiantes?
Well, this question allows me to clarify something regarding that, and it's the fact that this micro, meso, and macro level were used as part of the analysis. So I collected the data in Spanish, and this data was in all the subjects, so not only in English. I collected data from social studies, from English, from Spanish, from science, and what I analyzed was the interaction that was happening between teachers and students, coordinators and students. And so that language that I collected was the corpus that I used to analyze it using the lens of the 3 levels. So I wasn't talking about the English levels of the students, but the levels of analysis that I used for the corpus.
There is a question by Rodrigo Rodriguez. He says, could you mention some of the lexical choices and structures that showed up in your analysis as those that collaborate to a positive discourse in terms of peace building? Like, do you remember any of those lexical choices?
Thank you, Rodrigo. One of the episodes in particular was the one that I thought had more potential for peace building. And it is very funny, but most of those lexical choices came from students and not teachers. And they came from resisting discourse. So it was students asking for space and asking or like not very peacefully, but asking for their voices to be heard. So those lexical choices in which students express the lack of justice, or when in a conversation with the teacher, they demand for their views to be considered, those are the spaces where I thought I saw potential for peace building.
Nayibe Rosado asks, if a teacher is pressed to cover the content of the syllabus for a course, what would you say so the teacher moves to consider peace building as more important than the third conditional?
That's a very good question. And I think it's a question that it's, well, I don't know, but I think it's easy to answer. And I think it's because as top-down policy, all teachers in Colombia need to work on peace building and citizenship competences. So already in our curriculum, in our curricula, we have an aspect of competencias ciudadanas or Cátedra de la Paz, depending on how schools have approached it. Also, in the national suggested curriculum, we have a theme that is peace building or democracy and peace. So as English teachers, we are also, we have this opportunity of, using English as an excuse or as a vehicle to teach peace. So I wouldn't think about it as an extra thing or something to add to their teaching. It is something that it's already there, and this study is only providing one way to do it, because sometimes we see it as something separate from what we're teaching, but in reality, it's there with every lexical choice we make, with every grammar that we use, with every topic that we talk about in the class, we can do that. So we can use the third conditional or the first conditional to talk about peace.
There's also an overlapping question by Paola Perez and Janilis Romero, and they basically ask, do you have any suggestions related to how can we EFL teachers teach English as well as build a climate of peace?
Yes, different suggestions, but the main one would be look at your discourse. Look at not only what you say, but the postures that you do in class, the way you give turns to students, the way you address them. What is it that you say? What are the materials that you bring to class? Like the readings that you bring to your class, who are these readings favoring? Are you giving students the chance to analyze this reading in terms of who is being discriminated or who is being silenced? So all these ideas, like every single thing we do in the class, can be taken care of. So it does look at peace building, because we build peace in every one of our actions. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry,
Yes.
my mic was.
Yes.
So we have the chance to two more questions, and then I think we have covered them all. So the other question by Leonardo Benavides is, he says that he thinks peace is a very controversial term to discuss, especially in so many contexts in Colombia, where peace is just seen as the absence of war. violence or insecurity. So his question is, how can teachers make students be more aware of the idea that peace has also to do with qualities to live together, solve conflicts, and avoid the aggressive use of language to interact with each other? So that kind of overlaps with some things you've said, but I don't know if you could wrap up on it.
And actually, Leonardo, thank you very much for that question, because that was the starting point of my dissertation. When I started reading about peace education, there's always this idea that peace is the absence of war. So here in Colombia, where war and conflict, material war, is present, we have normalized so many other aspects of violence. So for us, if there is no blood, if nobody got killed, it's not war. Or it's only when we can talk about the opposite of peace, and that is not what it is. So we in the classrooms, we have so many instances of microaggressions through language, discrimination, racism, classism, and those are not regarded as absence of peace, but they are. So to answer your questions, I think, how can we make them aware? I think we can just keep on doing more and more research, keep on spreading the word, keep on showing these examples and putting them on the spotlight, so that we as teachers can realize that language is, again, that tangible aspect that can hurt or can emancipate the people we talk to. Again, your mic is off.
Thank you, Karine. And to conclude, there is a question by Ana Gutierrez and another one by Lourdes Rey. So one is, do you consider this can take place in public education? How can teachers in private education contribute to construction of peace? So do you think that it will work in both sectors, private and public? And then the last question from Lourdes is, from the one episode you conducted with the teacher, what transformations were you able to see in her or him?
Mm-hmm. Okay, about the first question, that's very interesting. Actually, when I began, I wanted to go to two contexts, public and private, and see how, if there were some similarities in the discourse regarding peace building, but that was not possible. You know, it's not very easy to get access to private schools sometimes. But I don't know. I don't know if what we would find would be similar, but I do think there are interesting things to look at in both contexts. So it would be very interesting if we could do something similar in a private institution to see how these course patterns change or differ or are similar to the public context. And as for the last question, that was one of the things that I did not get to see. The transformative discourse analysis happened as an analysis. So the teacher sat with me, we listened to the recording. She analyzed, because I want to give you a little bit of context. The teacher was performing what can be called a restorative pedagogy. So she wanted to diminish the use of nicknames in her classroom. So she brought what she called a hugging circle. So students were hugging each other and they were apologizing to each other. And so as she modeled the pedagogy, she would say something like, the troublemaker of the classroom, I apologize to you. Or this one here who, I don't know, who is rude, I'm apologizing to you. So she was conducting a restorative pedagogy, but the discourse that she was using was actually emphasizing on the nicknames and the labeling of the students. So when she listened to the recording, she realized that there was a contradiction between what she was saying and what she meant to do. So the episode only got to that point of reflection and looking at look, this is what you're doing. This is what you think you're doing, but this is what you are doing with your discourse. And so the teacher could actually, you know, give me a lot of reflection on that, on how she said things like, I need to pay more attention to what I say in the classroom. What I was doing with my activity, I was erasing it with my words. So this was a very interesting thing to see.
Well, thank you very much, Luz Karime, for your presentation. This has been great, and I have a lot of positive and interesting comments in the chat. Thank you very much. And
thank you all for having me.
Thank you to participants and you know, attendees. Also, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much for attending.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.